Oh, brilliant. I think we're going to get started because I can see we've got a good group of people coming in now as well. I'll just keep admitting people as they come through, but let's kick off. So welcome everyone to the sixth, my goodness, annual Literary Agents meeting. We're really glad that you're here. If you're here for the first time, we're a BSI, Baker Street Regular Science Society. Um, and whoop, let me find my notes. We really try to put this on to celebrate the life and work of Conan Doyle, including Sherlock Holmes, but not exclusively Sherlock Holmes. We'd like to look at his wider work as well. And our hope is that within that BSI weekend, we can create a little space for some non-Sherlockian Doyle, but we're not doing that this month. We're not doing that this year. We've decided that we're actually going to focus on Sherlock Holmes adaptations because it feels a bit weird to go 6 years and actually not really properly talk about Sherlock Holmes. So, not a month goes by without a new Holmes adaptation being announced. And they vary enormously, of course, in focus and style, from things that are very much in the spirit of the original stories to productions that consciously reinvent and reinterpret them for a new age. And I suppose it's testament to Conan Doyle that we have stories that continue to speak to us to this day and characters who you can do that with. On registering for this event, we asked you a question which was about your favorite adaptations. And so, unsurprisingly, there was a very, very wide mix. There were lots of people loving the Brett adaptation from Granada. There were votes for Sherlock, the Hammer Hound, the BBC radio series with Clive Merrison. But there were also votes cast for lots of plays and individual radio dramas as well. And so it's brilliant that we can sort of leap into some of that today and really explore it. So this year, the whole meeting is going to be a panel discussion led by Ashley, who I'm going to pass over to in a second. But we hope that you have plenty of questions for the panel as well. So I'll take a back seat and keep monitoring the chat, and I will call on people to ask their question when the moment arises. So get your thinking caps on, get some questions for the panel and post them into the chat. But for now, I'm going to pass across to Ashley for the rest of the meeting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. And if I took the time to go over all of their work and all of their bios, that would take up the full hour. So I've decided to try to do them all equal injustice with the brevity of my introductions. But so you know who we have here, Jonathan Barnes. Wave, Jonathan. Hi. So
Hello.
we know who's you.
Hello.
Jonathan Barnes is the author of The Somnambulist and Domino Men. So those are novels in the Victorian fantasy horror genre. So we're right on target in our Conan Doyle world. And he's also written the scripts for a number of the Big Finish audio dramatizations for Sherlock Holmes, original stories, original stories. Wonderful. Jeffrey Hatcher. Hi, Jeff. Uh,
Hello.
Jeff is a prolific playwright and screenwriter. Um, Lots of writing in the mystery genre and lots of overlap with a number of other authors, some of whom are Conan Doyle's contemporaries. Sherlockians probably know Jeff best from the script for Mr. Holmes, the film, and the wonderful Holmes and Watson play, which hopefully many of you have seen. I know we went to a production of it when we were in Indianapolis a few years ago. So if you were there for that, I'm sure you enjoyed it. We're going to try to not spoil the ending of your play there, Jeff.
Thank you.
Ken Ludwig. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
Uh, and special thanks to Ken because I'm actually in the room he was supposed to be in for the BSI weekend, but Ken is joining us from DC today. Uh, Ken, of course, also a prolific playwright, dedicated primarily to writing stage comedy, but has dabbled in mystery with his work with the Agatha Christie estate and in the Sherlock Holmes world with Baskerville and with the more recent Moriarty, which I especially love because it basically has my dog on the cover. So there's that. And then Mark Shanahan. Hi, Mark. Mark is the artistic director of Westport Country Playhouse up in Connecticut. He's joining us from Virginia today, where he's directing one of Jeff's plays because it's a small, wonderful world. And Sherlockians will probably know Mark best from his wonderful play, A Sherlock Carol, which spent 2 seasons off Broadway in New York, as well as playing all over the country. So thank you to our panelists. Primarily what I want to do is stop yapping myself and encourage them to converse with each other. What I was saying to them before you all joined was that writing is a very solitary world, and we don't sort of get the opportunity as non-writers, as audience members, to listen to these artists talk to each other about their craft, which they have a lot of differences in their processes and a lot of similarities, particularly here in their choice of work. So I want to just start by throwing out to the panel kind of what did you start with a Sherlock Holmes adaptation? Why Sherlock Holmes? What drew you to that in particular? Anybody can jump in.
In my case, I was asked to. With Mr. Holmes, the film, it's based on a book called A Slight Trick of the Mind by Mitch Kellin. So I was asked to adapt that. And, obviously I've been a huge Holmes fan going way back. And then after that film, then somebody asked me to do a Holmes play. So, one thing leads to another. And I'm sure, like everybody here, I tend to internalize a certain part of Holmes speak. How the characters speak, how they engage with one thing or another. And so it's a little like being a character actor, I think, putting on the cloak of Conan Doyle to try to work our way into that world and those characters.
I had a very different introduction or entry into the world as a playwright. I generally am always writing, as I'm sure all of us on this panel are. And I had finished a play, and I was thinking, well, what would my next play be? I didn't know what to write next, and I walked around my library, and I know a book happened to be sticking out, a serendipity, I guess, and it was Hound of the Baskervilles, a separate little paperback of it. And I thought, gee, I haven't read that in so long. Let me pull it out and read it. And I read it, and I was shocked and happily shocked that it was such a superb story. It's not a short story, but it's a novella. It's certainly not a long novel, and it was just so great. And I thought this is really one of the 2 greatest adventure stories ever written in the English language. And I thought, how could I maybe do this as the next play? I'd never done any Conan Doyle, and I'm well, who couldn't be a fan of Conan Doyle, of Sherlock Holmes? But it was not an obsession of mine, and I didn't know most of the stories. I just, occasionally picked them up like I pick up other things up. So I read this, loved it so much, and thought I'd like to put this on stage. But then when I thought of putting it on stage, because it's such a large story going to, different places and so many characters, I thought, oh, am I going to do this with, a cast of 15? Or no, because it won't get produced. So I thought, oh, I'll do a small cast and they'll double. And it's the first time that I'd ever done anything like that. So I ended up with a cast of 5 and they doubled. So ultimately what happened was the play ended up being more about the theater than it was about Conan Doyle per se or Sherlock Holmes per se. At least that's the way I started to think about it. And that was sort of an inspiring way for me to think about it, that I was doing something more organic, if you will.
Super.
It's funny. First of all, you'll excuse my voice. I seem to have lost my voice this morning. So if I scare everyone, it's theatrical. But I have to tell you that I know Ken and Jeffrey's work, and Jonathan, I've listened to almost probably all of your Big Finish audios. I love them. And so I come to it as a real fan, but I love other people's adaptations. I love having sort of drenched myself in it since I was a boy. Excuse me. And when my dad was sick when I was a kid, and he survived, he was good, but for a good number of years it was tough. He took me down to Theater 80 St. Mark's, if anyone remembers it, where there were secondhand revival movies happening down in the East Village on a rainy Saturday afternoon. And that was my first exposure when I was about 10 to the Basil Rathbone movies, and I loved them. And shortly after that, I devoured all the novels, and I loved them as a kid. So to me, it was a no-brainer. As I worked in the theater, I was often assigned to direct or act in some piece of work that was a mystery play because I was drawn to them. And in fact, I've been a fan of Ken's Baskerville, and I've studied it, and I've directed two of Jeffrey's plays, the Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Suicide Club, as well as Holmes and Watson. And I was in the premiere of the West End Horror by Tony and Marcia Dodge many years ago, which was adapted from Nicholas Meyer's book at Bay Street Theater, and we did it out in Pioneer. And standing inside those plays or directing them, I was so taken by how there is a camaraderie out there of people who really cherish the character, and the character can be so malleable, whether it's a comedy like Ken's that celebrates theater or an effort to truly delve into what feels like a proper Holmes adventure in Jeffrey Hatcher's Suicide Club. There's so many remarkable ways the character survives. I was sort of taken with the idea of thinking to write a play with Holmes would be like visiting with friends and sort of sitting in that world that I imagined was real as a boy. When my dad finally took me to London, before the Sherlock Holmes Museum, we went to the office building that would have been 221B Baker Street. There was a bank there at the time, and the fellow who worked at the bank, I was 14, he showed me all these letters, and he said, "These are people who write me every day and ask, 'Mr. Holmes, will you please help me?'" This was in 1985. "Will you please come and help me?" And I know that there are people out there who know very well that Sherlock Holmes is a fictitious character, but still the belief in this character is so meaningful to so many people that they will still reach out and write. So there's something about this character that draws people together. And in the business of theater, we bring people together in a room for a good story well told. And I think this character, who has a unique theatrical tradition on top of his literary tradition, really activates a stage or activates the theater in a beautiful way.
Marvelous.
Yeah, and as for me, I mean, I think we've all said we're sort of steeped in Doyle and in Holmes, and I think for most of us it comes from childhood, doesn't it? Boyhood, I guess, for the four of us today. And I've always said when I've asked this, even though the answer is slightly cringy at this point, really, my way in was the Disney film Basil the Great Mouse Detective, which I saw when it came out as a small boy, and that was the gateway drug. My dad then gave me the short stories, and just sort of fell in love with them. And I think the earliest stories I wrote, as at school, were kind of Holmes versions of Holmes stories, and kind of, I guess, Holmes pastiches. So yeah, much later on, and I'm here sort of, I guess, at least partly on behalf of Big Finish Productions, the audio company. I've actually mentioned kind enough to mention a couple of my novels in the introduction. I think I've actually written 7 novels now. I changed my name halfway through for branding purposes to J.S. Barnes, which has resulted in no more sales and just general confusion. But that's what my other novels are published under. So when I came to Big Finish, they do a lot of Doctor Who stuff and other sort of related franchises, but the one I really wanted to do was Sherlock Holmes, and they were already doing a few sort of adaptations of Hound the Baskervilles, and they did an adaptation of one of David Stuart Davies' novels, and it was all just I can say this because the executive producer who was going to be here isn't. It was all sort of slightly chaotic, and I came in 2012 with a little bit of a plan to write stories in the tradition of Doyle. And certainly what I found over the subsequent sort of dozen years is that the more I've written, the closer I've come to Doyle, or at least, I hope the closer I've come to Doyle.
That's fantastic. So many of you said something about the voice of Conan Doyle. I mean, working in this world, of course, you get the magic of the mythical characters, right, of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. But Conan Doyle's language is distinctive. Does How did you find that? Did it just get inside you and it became a natural thing? Did you start sort of becoming Conan Doyle at the kitchen table? Uh, or did you find yourself laboring over it at all? Curious.
Well, speaking for myself, I think as I mentioned earlier, because you read all this stuff and you see Basil Rathbone, you see Jeremy Brett, it does just kind of get into your brain. I don't mean to sound casual, but it's not the hardest thing in the world to start talking like Sherlock Holmes. And, occasionally you have to check something. I remember once having Holmes use a telephone and thinking, well, did he ever use a telephone? And did a Kindle search, like, yep, there he is. One time he picks up a telephone. But yeah, you pick up that way of talking, and it's very clipped, and it's kind of sounds like a machine talking, kind of whirling knives and crystal and all that kind of thing. But it's weird how much it infects your thinking. There are probably some other characters like that. Groucho Marx, probably, where we could all, if we had to, suddenly fall into a rhythm. But it's amazing how much it's already there in our thinking.
Hmm.
And of course, with doing an adaptation of anything Holmes, we've got Watson, and Watson's voice is equally distinctive. It's maybe because my familiarity with it is a lot through the great set of films with who's the famous actor who did
Basil Rathbone,
yeah, but who did Watson?
Nigel Bruce.
Nigel Bruce is doing hearing Nigel Bruce in my head, and of course that being the narrator of the stories, that's the voice we hear more than we hear Holmes. And so when I did my adaptation, I was trying to channel him just as much as I was Holmes, and the wildly wonderful distinction between them that Conan Doyle created is what made the myth. They're both equal parts of the great myth that he produced.
Ken, you bring up something interesting. Like, one of the things that's beautiful about the books too is that Holmes is always this great mystery, the best mystery in it, to Watson, who's always astounded by him in some ways. So they're always underneath it also a story about this friendship, which is worth exploring to some extent too. And but when writing the voice of Holmes, he's both reactive and an engine always. And so when you read the stories, Holmes very often finishes a sentence or moves on to the next thing. So it's really propulsive and good for a dramatist. And
Yeah.
so you came to me, Doctor. He just finishes something and moves on to something else. And it's funny. Someone just in the comments mentioned that they saw Jeffrey play Holmes, when someone was sick, he stepped in. And I wondered, Jeffrey, like what it's like to actually speak that engine of words for you. And when you write, any of you, do you sit there and privately close the door and hope no one in your house hears you, and try to sound like Holmes as you say it out loud back to yourself?
Well, I gotta say, the only reason I played Holmes was because a dear friend of mine, Steve Hendrickson, had an aneurysm on opening night, and we had to we looked around quickly for all the tall, thin guys who were available, but none of them were. And I kind of knew the script, so I went in fast. But it's amazing to do Holmes. You really on stage, you really have to have the kind of background that you'd need for Shaw or Shakespeare. The perfect elocution, a lot of breath control. Those are often long sentences. So yeah, there's a lot of verbal dexterity that an actor has to have. And of course, in terms of my looks, it was more like, well, here's a country doctor who's playing Sherlock Holmes this afternoon. I once said to someone that we're in a world of Holmeses and Watsons, 95% of us are Watsons. I'm sure I disappointed people who wanted the hawk nose and the chipped cheekbones.
Maybe Jonathan Barnes will write you one so you can hide behind
Yeah,
that.
I did Holmes in college on a radio show, and I
Oh,
thought that was great because I could be very, very, nasal, and nobody could see what I really looked like.
And that's the beauty of audio, isn't it? That you can play all kinds of different roles. Our Sherlock Holmes, Nicholas Briggs, is even doing it on audio is frequently absolutely exhausted
huh.
by the end of the recording sessions, just because, as you say, that it's the sheer speed at which you have to deliver the material, isn't it? It's that sort of machine gun
Mhm.
fire. But going back to the Watson voice as well, I mean, I always think that's interesting because so often that's the voice that's missing from adaptations, almost kind of necessarily, particularly on screen, and even a great, even the great Watsons of the Granada series, there's still a little bit in the background. Even when the early ones of David Burke, they will drop in bits of Doyle, won't they, as narration, but that sort of fades as the series goes on. So certainly, as an audio writer, I was really keen to put that voice back in so that we do have the Watson voice, alongside the Holmes voice. And our Watson, Richard Earle, will often say that he has many more lines than Holmes, which is generally the case.
I thought it was interesting in the Benedict Cumberbatch version that the actor who played Watson, who's one of my Martin Freeman, who's just one of my favorite actors ever, 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 didn't. While Benedict fit into the Holmes view, maybe because of his type, his angular, his thinness, and so on. Freeman didn't because he seemed like a regular guy. Yes, he was a little neurotic and so on. I loved him. I think he was fantastic, and he can do anything. I just didn't watch him in anything, but it was an interesting take to me because it wasn't at all a touchstone for the Watsons I knew before, other than the story part of it, who he was and his background from I think it was Afghanistan or and the limp and so on. So I thought that was a very bold and obviously very good choice by I don't know if it was Granada or whoever did it.
BBC.
Sorry.
It's the BBC.
You see, it ended up being a great choice because it was a great series. But they certainly seemed to me not to adhere to the character we expected.
I think that's probably because in the long term, it's always about the chemistry between the two actors
Mm,
bouncing off each other, which, in that case was probably more important than to them, at least, than, connecting up with Nigel Bruce or Edward Hardwicke or someone like that, who were perfect companions for Basil Rathbone and Jeremy Brett.
right, right. Hmm.
I always
It's
think with what,
interesting.
sorry,
Please, Jonathan, go ahead.
sorry, I always think with Watson, it's the harder part to cast in a way than Holmes, because Holmes you always need a kind of dazzling star for, but with Watson, you need someone who can convince as a doctor and as a soldier and as a writer. And I'm not sure all the screen Watsons, with the greatest of respect to Nigel Bruce, necessarily convince in all three of those arenas. But arguably, as you say, Freeman did.
We had trouble. Everyone here probably knows that Ashley and I work together, and she's the brains of the outfit, and we worked on two of them together, and finding a Watson was harder than finding a Holmes in every case. Two or three of them we worked on.
But it is that thing where, the line is he was not himself luminous, but he was a conductor of light. And I think we're, very off. Even Nigel Bruce was sort of upset that he just played a buffalo. It's just a very baffled guy all the time. But even in the books, you look and you think this guy is smart, heroic, and Holmes values him in a way above others. He's the guy who's worth fighting for and solving these cases so that good, decent people like him will be there, and sort of stand. And I think that's what's at the core of that friendship. Kind of makes Watson has to make it worthwhile for Holmes. It's partly what I tried to write into my play too. If you get rid of Watson, you better apologize to him at the end. And so I had a Holmes who decided that he didn't want to be Holmes anymore. He's sick of this, which means getting rid of Watson. And if you're going to take that back, you better go to Watson and say, this is the thing. It's not just Holmes, it's Holmes and Watson.
Yeah, there's a kind of Fred and Ginger thing about them. Fred gave her a class, she gave him sex, and then certainly without Watson, there's a slight absence of heart. There's a moment I may have misremembered it, but from the Granada series when Watson passes out after Holmes reveals that he's back. Is dressed as the old bookseller, and I always remember it as Watson passes out. It's Hardwick, and Jeremy Brett leans over, and I could swear he kisses him on the forehead while he's still passed out, and then his eyelids flutter open, and it's like I can only do this while you're unconscious, to show the affection that I have for you. Yeah, it's kind of like meeting a couple who've gotten divorced and saying, gee, I don't like you as much as I did when your wife was here.
Yeah. Well, you have these wonderful voices in your head as you're writing, and the characters sound a particular way to you, and that may be informed by your reading Conan Doyle first, or for some of you, it sounds like voices from different adaptations are in your head, and that's how your characters sound. Have any of you faced frustration with actors or directors or designers who are sort of interpreting your work in a way that feels like it's a contrast with what you had in mind?
I am not particularly, because I think because they can go back and read the canon, and those two characters are so distinct as created by Conan Doyle. Of course, I'm sure everyone who's here has had frustrations with, oh, this actor isn't as good, quote unquote, good as I wanted them to be, or isn't doing this. But that would be on a same general level. At least with Doyle, with Holmes and Watson, boy, the characters are very specific, so they have something they know before they even read my play what they're going to be, unless I've changed that radically, and I don't think I ever tried to change them radically. I was about to say a minute ago too, the other adaptation, which is not a drama for the stage or film, is of course the great Laurie King books. There, I thought that very bold in Beekeeper's Apprentice, I thought was one of my favorite books ever, ever, ever. And it's just such a bold way to reimagine Holmes. She sort of got rid of Watson, I think. It was, I thought, electrifyingly good.
Yeah, if I had to vote for somebody else's, it's not really an adaptation, it's a riff. It's
Yeah.
They Might Be Giants, that James Goldman wrote. I mean, it's not a perfect film. There are things, quote unquote, wrong with it. But there's wonderful stuff and wonderful texture of New York. And the idea that George C. Scott plays a man who's crazy and thinks he's Holmes, and that lets you into the world. I think that's a wonderful take on Holmes. That it doesn't dilute anything from the originals, and of course, it's got the bit that I think we all have to do. Very early on, Rue McClanahan comes into a room and says, "Oh, do that thing," and it's basically the Dr. Mortimer stick bit.
Yeah.
Do that thing where you tell everything about someone from the way they're dressed or what they're carrying. And I think we probably all had to do that once in our play. It's kind of like what you have to prove to do a Holmes adaptation. It's like, well, can you do the Moriarty or the Mortimer Stick bit? And I wonder if any of you have thought like, oh yeah, I've got to do that thing that he does just to prove that I can do it.
I did it with a hat, which of course he himself had also done. But absolutely, absolutely, and the audience gets such joy of that from that. They expect it, so
Yeah.
I didn't ever have a feeling that, oh, I was just putting that in and I wish I didn't have to. It's a joyous part of these creations he made.
I actually love that you can also get applause from an audience when it's over. It seems like a parlor trick that an audience loves. And I've seen it in all your plays. It's really quite a wonderful moment for an audience to appreciate that they've been party to it in that regard. It's great.
I always
It
think
must be particularly tricky for radio, for the audiobooks, right? Because you have to describe what the thing is and then do the deduction, right, Jonathan?
yes, yes. I always find the hardest bit with them though is linking up the deductions with the evidence, isn't it? And I've certainly been up against a deadline. I have been guilty of the old "I'll explain later, Watson." You have the joy of the deductions, but not the hard work of having to figure out how he did it.
But have any of you ever tried to do it? I've sat on the subway and said, okay, I'm going to Sherlock that guy, and his shoes are made of. Inevitably, I'm going to be wrong, and I'm never going to do it. But it works in a Sherlock Holmes story, you know.
Yeah.
There's a question here, Ashley, coming from Jay, which is about the process of adaptation, I suppose. I mean, if you're adapting a particular story like you did, Ken, with The Hound, then I guess you're going back to the original text. But Jay's asking, creatively, do you rely on, the original text? Do you keep going back to the original Sherlock Holmes stories, or do you do your own expansive research? You're drawing on different things to create your own adaptations? How faithful or how much fidelity is there to the original as you're creating your adaptations?
Well, in my case with Baskerville, very faithful in terms of the story because the story is so good. How to tell it and not move around too much. Go to the hall and go elsewhere. But one place I very consciously did, and you do this as all of us as writers. What's best for the piece? The person actually remind me who it is. I guess it's who I turned into a Texan. It said he was Canadian in the story.
Oh, Sir Henry Baskerville.
Sir Henry Baskerville, and he's Canadian, right? In the original story, I believe.
Well, he's been living in Canada, so yeah.
In Canada. Well, I changed him into a Texan because I thought there was just a lot of humor I could get out of a Texan, and the way they speak, and it's very distinctive. And I don't, Canadian isn't as distinctive. Ashley's from Canada originally, and I could have imitated her voice, but I chose to do it.
But you wrote the play before you met me, so that was hard to do.
There you go.
Actually, Canada is now province of Texas. I don't know if you. Yeah, that was announced this morning. So
was it good? Well,
right,
yeah,
right.
Along with Iceland or Greenland. So that as playwrights, we all make those very specific choices. A lot of them big, just to make the play better.
Anybody else? Any other resources?
Well,
You're like, this is my favorite thing.
It's a funny thing about adaptation, though. You can pull something apart as far as it goes until it no longer resembles the thing that it was, and then you have to think of what an audience's expectation is too. But as I say, this character is so malleable. You could spoof him, you could make it dark, you could be gothic, you could do many different things, so long as there are certain things that belong to the character that I think the audience might on some level need to understand that this is what they're the character that belongs to all of us at this point in some ways, unleashed on the world. And I'm curious, even with you guys, there are certain ways of quoting the canon but making it your own so that it's fun to have those touchstones in the piece. and an audience, particularly the ones who love the character already, respond to that. But those who don't or don't know the character very well, other than as an icon, really sort of learn the character that way too. And in my case, I actually tried to fold in elements of The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle into a play while ripping it apart and assigning different ideas to it, or little lines I could quote and steal, but reimagining or reinventing that too. And it's great fun to, I don't know, Jeff used the word riff before too, to riff on that. But the character has always been a very hard character to adapt, because in the books, he doesn't really change, right? He's fine in one way as a story and fine at the end. And a character needs a dramatic problem. And the best dramatic problem, the easiest one in a way though, is I'm bored, I have no case, I have a case, I feel better, right? There's a change there. But, the dramatist wants to find a way outside of the books to say, what makes it worthy of 2 hours on a stage is that there is a change that happens here, that the case does help you learn something. And then the character is surprising to us in a way that I think is remarkable in the use of theater.
Yeah, it's very tricky on stage because, aside from anything else, you've got 2 hours to fill. And unless you're doing what Ken did with Baskerville, there are only 4 novels that you can play with, which and with the exception of Ken's Baskerville, I can't really imagine terribly good stage versions of The Sign of Four or things like that. They don't function in the same way. Whereas the short stories function beautifully as half-hour or 50-minute Granada TV shows. They're just perfectly contained and they're episodic, and he doesn't have to change that much. So yeah, that's very tricky. There has to be something about your play that says this is a very special episode of Sherlock Holmes to deserve its place on stage. There has to be some other growth, even if it's not necessarily Holmes himself, something else that moves the thing forward in a way that says this deserves to be here and not, just part of the weekly series.
There was I'm not sure it's made it across the Atlantic yet. There was a terrific stage version of The Valley of Fear a couple of years ago by Black Eyed Theatre, which really adapted it brilliantly. And the sort of theatrical device that really made it come to life was that they would kind of juxtapose the stuff happening in the present day involving Holmes and Watson and the murder investigation, and then cutting to and fro between the stuff in the States, whereas obviously Doyle just gives it to you, doesn't he, more or less in 2 massive chunks. So yeah, that was a great stage version, I thought, of one of the lesser done pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting that question of how do you provide enough content once you've done The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is the most adaptable of the long form Sherlock Holmes. If you want something to last for, the length of a stage play, you have to either add a bunch of stories together, right? Ken, that's what you did in Moriarty.
Right.
Mix it with something else. So mix it with A Christmas Carol. So you have Blue Carbuncle, which isn't a whole story on its own for stage, but mix it with A Christmas Carol, and now you have enough to fill the whole story. Or you have to write something entirely original that is complex enough that it can sustain the mystery for that long. And I think, we have all of those represented here. Do you guys think one of those is easier? What drew you to the choice you made rather than something else? Why, for instance, Ken pull from several different Conan Doyle short stories to sort of quilt together an original story rather than like Jeff writing a totally new mystery? It's an interesting sort of approach.
Well, in my case, I'll use Holmes and Watson as an example. When my friend had his aneurysm and we were trying to find an actor to replace him, we did call up all the tall, ascetic-looking guys in town, and they're all busy. And it got me to thinking, well, whenever you cast Sherlock Holmes, you're going to look at a certain type. And it made me think when Sherlock Holmes was ostensibly dead in the falls of Reichenbach, what would happen if a bunch of guys showed up saying, "I'm Sherlock Holmes. No, I'm Sherlock Holmes. No, I'm Sherlock Holmes." So that's how the idea of Holmes and Watson came together. And the fun part was that I thought I could insert the narrative into a gap in Holmes's interregnum. So, people talk about canonical, non-canonical, and all that kind of thing. It was simply fun to think that, okay, if I put it right here, then everything that happens in Conan Doyle up to this point still functions properly, and everything that happens after functions properly. So I'm kind of like fitting in a jigsaw piece that nobody was asking me to do.
Yeah, it's I just wondered about when you're are there things that are out of bounds for you when you come to adaptations? Are the things that you think, I in the spirit of what you were saying, Mark, about trying to move the character on and create problems and tensions, are the things that you just go, no, I'm not going to go in that direction? Are the things that are helpful from the canon, things that you want to drop? And related to that, there's a question here in the chat from Ray, which is, is a love interest for Holmes a good idea when it comes to an adaptation?
Loving what?
A love interest. Give Holmes a love interest. Is that a good idea?
Oh, sorry.
My feeling is everything is a good idea if it makes a great play. If there's a great love story to be told and you can use that character to do it, then absolutely. And by the way, not everything has to be for everyone. People who don't want a love story don't have to buy into that too. But if the character is useful, the dramatist only has to take what they need to make the thing work. I thought of all the kinds of people who are in this room while writing and thought, oh, some irregular is going to take me to task if I do this, that, or the other thing. You can't help it. It's in your head that, some people are going to have some issue. And so in my play, I had a character say, usually a story goes like this, and we started off like that. And then one of the narrators says, but this is not going to be that kind of story. And I figure you could then get away with almost anything to be like, this might include some things that you thought you knew the character, but you might learn some new things about the character as well.
I agree with Mark entirely on that. That's just what I always think of. Look, nothing's out of bounds. Nothing is, because ultimately, if we're writing a play, the 2 hours traffic of this stage, if you're not always interested and it's not always moving forward and we're on the edge of our seats, we've done it wrong and we have to go fix it. That's the whole bottom line. A play is, you're there to be entertained in some sense, intellectually entertained, but story's got to move along. You can't, and that's what we all know as writers for the stage, that when we go to previews, which I always consider the most important part of the whole process for me, which is that then I've got an audience who's telling me what works and what doesn't, and the audience tells you everything, and they're always right as long as there's enough of them in the room. So early on, even with the first reading or something, when I do workshops before the production of the plays, I always ask the artistic directors, look, we'll do these 5 days, great, work in the room with the actors, and then at the end, I want 25 or 50 people on folding chairs to hear it through, and then I really know what's happening, and then then rewrite, and then plays are always rewritten, and then get to the previews. And as many as possible, so that I can, because otherwise I can't get the play right, because they tell me, and then I know, okay, the play's working, because you can't keep your eyes off it, and you want to turn metaphorically to the page. You just keep you want to see what happens next.
Can I ask you guys a question though? In keeping with that wonderful question about is a love story a good idea, because someone's always going to turn to Adler, right? Ken wrote Moriarty. There's so many these ancillary characters. For him, you have more room to then flesh them out. even Lestrade or Lestrade, depending on where you're coming from. In my London production, he was Lestrade. In New York, he was Lestrade. So, but what do you think about fleshing out those characters who then really are born in Conan Doyle, but then and germinated there, but then become your own because you fleshed them out?
Again, it's just necessity. It's panic. I look at it, it's not going well. I just need to add people and make them really interesting, and everybody on stage has to be interesting all the time. I've had a huge challenge to do this with these two Christie plays I did, because I used in each case the core story from the novel I adapted for the stage. But after that, in her books, all the others that didn't really do it are always, by definition, red herrings. So they have stories that don't lead anywhere. They just don't. And at one point you think this person might have, at one point you think that's a real kind of mystery story, which the Holmes really are less so. They're more adventure stories, I think. And so what I've done in those cases is just say, fine, I'm taking all of them off the table and I'm inventing a whole set of the secondary characters from scratch as if I were writing my own comedy about this period and this time. And a comedy is what I'm writing with them because that's the relief from the murder that's happening, which is blood and guts.
This isn't a comment on anybody's work here, but my definition of a classic is something that no matter what you do to it, even something really dumb, the next morning it's going to get up again and go back to being a classic. So you can do whatever you like with these things, and it's not going to hurt Conan Doyle or Sherlock Holmes. People can argue about it. In terms of romance, Steve Dietz has a version where he kind of put Scandal in Bohemia and The Final Problem together. And somewhere near the end, Irene Adler and Holmes kiss. And I had a friend who was playing Holmes in it, and he refused to kiss her because he's a big Holmesian. He said he would never kiss her. He would never kiss her. And they would argue during rehearsal. And finally, they had to get to a negotiated settlement. Where they're kind of blowing a kiss, or maybe I'm pecking you on the cheek. But, where the actor was simply saying Holmes would not do this. And it was an interesting clash because both the adapter and the actor cared deeply. They just cared about different things.
Well, then I'm in real trouble because what Moriarty did, the whole reason of writing Moriarty was to have them meet, fall in love, and it's really a love story, a comic love story with adventure in it, about the two of them, and will they survive? Which one? Because it's adventure stories, somebody died or this or that, and at the end is a clinch between the two characters, and the play couldn't exist otherwise.
But it is interesting how much people are invested in these things.
Yeah.
Every 6, 7, 8 years, there's a new James Bond. And we get terribly upset if it doesn't look like the Bond we know or the Bond that we've made up in our minds. They just announced Matthew McFadden, I think, is going to be playing George Smiley in a series. And I think he's a terrific actor, but I can't help but think he's not chubby enough. He's not bald enough. He's not bland enough. Our ownership as readers and audience members become even more important than the ownership of Conan Doyle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, everybody who wants the Sherlock Holmes of Arthur Conan Doyle can find him by reading Arthur Conan Doyle. And if you want something else, you can find that too. The good thing about a play, of course, is that by the time the characters kiss at the end, the audience has already paid their money. So if they hate it, it doesn't change the box office receipts at the end of the day. And if you don't like that, go see something else. Sherlock Holmes has a million adaptations. You can always find one that suits your taste. Or if you don't, go back and read the stories again.
Yeah.
Yeah, people. You're right in that he's completely indestructible, isn't he? As everyone said. I always think there's that question though when you come to write a pastiche or whatever or an adaptation. Is that are you saying I'm going to tell my own story in the world of Holmes, or are you going to say what would Doyle do? And there's certainly lots of writers that take the second approach. But all the talk about stage plays, I wonder what people think. If you say to yourself, okay, what would Doyle do if he were going to put this on stage? And we have the famous note, don't we, to William Gillette? You may marry him, murder him, do what you will with him. I paraphrase. But then we also have his stage plays, don't we? We have the Stoner Case, which is a Speckled Band, and the Mazarin Stone as well. And you think, well, they're completely different in tone, really. They're much sort of broader and kind of coarser in a way than the stories. So there's something interesting, I think, when you look at his stage work, that even when Doyle was doing adaptations, he didn't do what the prose Doyle would have done.
It's fair, but he was also a terrible playwright.
Yes, that's
Sorry.
yeah.
His
True.
style
No,
I don't think translate very well.
his Speckled Band. I mean, it's the problem of taking a 30-minute idea and trying to turn it into a 2-hour and 15-minute idea. There's a big preface. There's a reading of the will or something like that goes on forever. Yeah.
He was up against a deadline, we should say, wasn't he? Because he was trying to preserve his money that he poured into the production of the previous play. So we can sympathise perhaps with that.
Wow.
So I'm getting a lot of writing out of panic here, which it corresponds when Mark and I were putting this year's meeting together, and I said I'll be in charge of wrangling the playwrights, and Mark said, "What is the collective noun for playwrights?" And I said, "I think it's a neurosis of playwrights. Just gotta get it on the stage. I don't have a character to do this. I'll just make one up. It's fine. They kiss? I don't know. Just make it happen. Just get it on stage."
I resemble that remark. I was going to say one other thing that's kind of funny is that when I was doing the play in London, it's about how people who have ownership of the character. Somebody came up to me and said, Mark, he would never say this, that, and the other thing. And somebody said, he would never say, "I'm down in the dumps." That's you. And all I had to do was open Study in Scarlet and say, it's right here. But people have an association or an idea already about it. So you're always battling with that to some extent. And that's okay, frankly, because you're wrestling with, what's the word, palimpsest, with the idea of what's right underneath what people think is under as you put the play on top of it, too.
Well, what's theater without the pedantic audience member who storms up to the playwright at intermission and says, "Well, I just want you to know," and then tells you something completely irrelevant to whether the play is
as
good or
an
not.
artistic writer, at least they're there and they want to be involved. I'm in. Don't worry. Argue with me. Yeah.
And it happens all the time. I read a play called "Lend Me a Soprano," and the aria that I gave the soprano I chose because I thought it would be the best one, and it was from Carmen. And some audience members said, "She's not a soprano. That's not a soprano part. You got this all wrong. You have to change the title, or you have to change the song." I'm thinking, well, no, no, just stay out of it.
Well, as I recall, because I was there for that, she put her hands on the hips, she turned into a sugar bowl and looked at you and said, Carmen is a mezzo soprano. And you looked right back at her and you said, "Yes, but nobody's going to buy a ticket to lend me a mezzo." And you just walked away.
That's exactly right.
A+.
Good line, Ken. Good line. Good line.
I think we should all have little business cards that we can hand out that says, "Write your own damn play."
Good.
Perfect.
I was just wondering if there's any aspect of the Sherlock Holmes stories that have really appealed to you that you've not been able to wrap into an adaptation, or is there kind of unfulfilled work there in the Sherlock Holmes canon that you think, that would make a really good story? I know, Jonathan, for your Untold, you went and mined all the the missing adventures, as it were, all the things that had the casual references to things that Watson or Holmes will reference some cases.
Well, not all of them. Not all of them. Only a handful. I wanted to leave more to try and get another commission, which has yet to
Isn't there one?
materialize. But those are always completely tantalizing, aren't they? All of those references. And yeah, we did a few of them. We did a few of them, and I tried to sort of link them together and make them part of a bigger design. Which may or may not have worked. You'll have to you'll have to listen. But all of those are great. I mean, the Great Rat of Sumatra, has obviously been done several times, but there's something completely tantalizing, I think, about it.
Hmm. They do work, by the way. You succeeded. It's very enjoyable.
Thank you. I was fishing slightly, but thank you.
Yeah. We got in there the remarkable worm unknown to science, the politician, the lighthouse, and the trained cormorant. I mean, all the besties.
Cool.
I think we're in our last 5 minutes here of the meeting. So if anybody in the chat has any final questions they want to throw out, now is your opportunity. Or we could just all do an interpretive dance.
I'll say something
All
I
right.
think from the Vincent Starretts and all the other things and Adrian Conan Doyle, the stories that came after, it's really, I do tip my hat to Nicholas Meyer for sort of showing us in a weird way that the character can be taken outside of what you thought you knew, and said there's so much possibility, and that course change in my understanding of Holmes' pastiches and literature that happened there really influences so many of us to be like, take a big bold swipe, see what the character can do. And we follow in a lot of different traditions of people who love this character from Conan Doyle and want to see where else we can place him. I think, Jonathan, your wonderful stories often can put the character outside of his comfort zone and things. I think that Ken and Jeffrey have both delivered plays that I've loved that do that as well. And we're always looking to see how the character, what it means right now, or what it means to us today, not to your grandparents or their grandparents. And that's the sort of remarkable thing about the use of these characters.
Yeah, it's kind of Holmes is kind of like Hamlet that way, that every generation or every 15 years or so, there are adaptations that bend Holmes towards current concerns, neuroses, etc. I made the point before that the Basil Rathbone Holmes, and we know most of the stuff is during World War II, is a Holmes who doesn't have doubts. He's pretty certain, as opposed to, say, Jeremy Brett. And but you wouldn't want a cocaine-addled Holmes during World War II. World War II needed Churchill and Holmes, and you had to be hard and sleek and know that you were the burning tip of a sword. And so Basil Rathbone is perfect for that, just like Jeremy Brett was for the 80s. So it's amazing how well Holmes will fill whatever the need is.
I think one can say, I was thinking about this. Are there other characters in literature from books, from novels or short stories, who one could have such a growth industry and have so many people be in love with these characters? You want to try all these different ways to experiment with him or them. And I can't think of any that are quite. There are other authors have created myths along the way. I always think of the Three Musketeers. In one fell swoop. Dumas created characters that sort of live forever, but not quite in the same way that we could write new stories about them and then make it more interesting. Maybe because they are a little neurotic, and for our modern world, those are the ones that work for us. Continue to. I certainly can't think of any others that are as rich as that for recreation?
Partially that's, Peter Pan is a fairy tale, yes, and Dracula is a gothic vampire, and there are characters who are so iconic. But
Yes.
the fantasy element takes over. I might be able to go to Holmes and say, "Can you help me solve a mystery?" or even try to think like him. And you really connect with the hope that the character is real in your mind.
Yeah, well said.
Precisely the question that I interrogated in my doctoral dissertation, and I didn't get to answer it there either in 400 pages. But I'm sure in the next 2.5 minutes we could probably figure it out.
That's brilliant. I think we're right on time now, aren't we, as well? And I know people have got if they're in New York, they've got other things to go to. So I think we'll wrap it up there. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to the panel for coming along. Ken, Jeffrey, Mark, Jonathan, that's been absolutely brilliant. As Charles has said in the chat, it's been a real peek behind the curtain, which is fantastic as well. Thanks so much, Ashley, for corralling whatever we said in the end was the verb that goes with the collective noun. And thank you everybody who's joined us and people who are watching now on YouTube. We'll be back next year with a topic that we will determine at some point in the next 6 months. But until then, thank you so much for joining us, and have a really great day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks ever so much.
Bye.
Great to see you all.